Ever since you can remember, you felt something in your chest telling you to move, to love, to speak, to try. Day after day, you pretend you don't hear it calling, or maybe you dismiss it as silliness or worse. But it's there, ready for you, and it will wait for you as long as you need. My name is Johnny G, and I invite you to join me on a journey of awakening as we dare to embrace our light. This is Refractive.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Refractive Podcast. Today, I am happy to present to you Jean Atman. For over 21 years, Jean has leaned into her career as an expert at helping people break free of negative experiences, let go of toxic relationships. And so she has helped over that period 20,000 people through the various facets of her services level up their life, step towards their inner power. And for those of you who listen regularly, you know that that's something that really resonates with me. So I think you're going to enjoy what she has to share today. And welcome, Jean. It's lovely to have you on Refractive.
Thank you. I appreciate being here with you.
Thank you so much. And so, you know what, before we even get into this conversation of how to really take a look at the relationships in your life that are dragging you down and how to move past and release some of the negative experiences that tend to keep us trapped. You call yourself a soul evolution coach, and I love this term. So can you share with us a bit of the background of that? How did you arrive at that? What does it mean for you? Because it's really a powerful title.
Thank you. Yeah, I've had it's kind of evolved with me throughout the years. It's changed because the work that I do is so multidimensional and multifaceted. It's hard to sort of put that into a container and name it something. So that was the closest thing I could come up with to describe it that people might be able to access. But ever since I was a little girl, I've always been tapped into the outer realms, and I would have visitors a lot when I was young, different spirits coming in. I could see earthbounds in our house, just really open to other things that people couldn't see, the subtleties of things that others couldn't see that were around me and my family. And during my teenage years, I shut that down because it seemed like no one else talked about that. No one knew about that. I felt like I was
It's a
maybe a
lot
little
to handle.
crazy. Yes, it is. Especially when your parents are so adamantly like, that doesn't exist. And I'm like, I'm literally looking at this earthbound right now. So you start to question your sanity. So I try to shut that part of myself down, and I went through a pretty hardcore rebellious stage in life because this planet just felt so awkward to me. I
Mhm.
never really felt like I fit in or belonged here. I just felt very different than a lot of other people. I was really focused on people's feelings and their needs and their well-being emotionally versus taking something from someone or walking over somebody to get something. That was never my agenda. So it was very weird to be around a lot of other people that were that way. And then I just found myself in a lot of tumultuous relationships that were really reflective of my upbringing. There was a lot of toxicity, a lot of abuse, and I continue to draw that in because that was still in my vibration, in my experience. So until I really learned what that all meant and how to navigate that, that's when life finally started to shift for me. And I really started to learn about how we really do create our reality based on our belief systems, based on our triggers, based on backstory and things that we believe about ourselves. And when we're little, we witness something and we experience something, and we're so young, we don't understand how to process it. It just
Mhm.
sort of lands in. And then we live in those ways that reflect that belief system, and we're not even aware of it.
Right.
So as soon as I started to really understand how that worked, I have spent decades diving into my inner worlds and just uncovering and unpacking everything I could possibly find.
Yeah.
And within that work, it's really helped me to be able to help others do the same because I have an intimate understanding of what happens in there. And I read energy for a living, and I have, connections with the outer realms. So that combination really sets me up for being able to see and understand a lot of things that are hidden.
Now, I know you also work in energy medicine, and I'm sure that we have some listeners who might not be familiar with that. So, would you be
Mhm.
willing to give a quick overview of what that involves?
Yeah, I'm a Reiki master. And so Reiki is a universal life force energy that anyone can channel through. And you have an attunement that opens you up to that frequency. And therefore, you can channel it through to yourself and to other people. So I teach people how to do that. I offer them attunements so they can open to those channels and then teach them how to heal themselves as well as other people, especially in
Mhm.
particular the chakra system. I'm training cranial psychotherapy through the Upledger Institute, Barbara Brennan's Hands of Light, study healing touch. I mean, polarity therapy. I've just taken so many different modalities throughout the years, just trying to, just thirsty for knowledge
Yeah,
about everything I could possibly learn about something that was innate to me that I didn't understand was actually a thing
yeah,
until I found Reiki.
that's
you
right.
know so as soon as I found that oh, other people understand this and other people also do this, I was fascinated, and that just sort of grew into a deep curiosity about everything I could get my hands on. So
Thank
it
you.
sort of morphed into its own modality within my professional work.
Amazing. Thank you. So let's
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the topic of the day, which is about processing these experiences that we perceive as negative, right? I don't believe that we have negative experiences, right? We have high vibration
Yeah.
experiences and low vibration experiences. But if we're talking in the 3D language, we have these negative things that happen to us, whether they are people, whether they are life situations, and it's like they're their own little force of gravity that trap us in, and we get stuck in orbit around this heaviness. And so what do you do when someone comes to you and they're trapped in this type of gravitational pull?
That's a really good question. And a lot of people do find me in that place where they just come in and say, I'm just stuck. Nothing's working. I just don't know what to do. I've tried all these things and nothing works. And the first lessons that I typically teach people is we're going to reverse engineer everything that you think is the right air quotes way of doing things.
Yeah.
Because what we people tend to do and what we're trained and taught to do is let's focus on all the problems outside of ourselves and let's try to fix those things.
Hmm.
And that is frivolous and it requires so much effort and it can be exhausting because you're never going to get the payoff that you actually know that's meant for you in those places.
Yeah.
So I encourage people to start to look within and see what's happening inside. And let's look at those limiting beliefs about what is tucked in your subconscious mind that you might not even be aware of,
Hmm.
but something is being reflected to you in your experience. So I teach people how to translate their experiences to be able to access those places within themselves. So
Hmm.
let's take something easy, like an emotional trigger. When you're being triggered, right? It's
Hmm.
not comfortable. It's really loud a lot of times. You just kind of want to ignore it, neglect it, reject it, whatever. But instead of taking that negative feeling that you're experiencing, that we're so trained to think, oh, we're not supposed to feel bad. We're always supposed to be happy and positive and things.
Hmm.
So we can tend to spiritually bypass those feelings. And what's happening is those things are surfacing because they're ready to be looked at and ready to be
Yeah.
healed.
Yeah.
So when you can look at it as something that's making you uncomfortable and creating suffering, but actually as information and opportunity, then you're like, oh, I can do something with this. And once I do, I don't really ever have to manage that too much anymore. So
Mhm.
it can be so productive if you can just remember that you're equipped to manage those things that are surfacing. So that's kind of where we start with people. I know that sounds really overwhelming. Within my private work, I can see where these blocks are. I can see where the timelines began and healing those places. And while I'm taking people through that process, I like to teach them also how to do this for themselves,
Yeah.
because we all have the capacity to do that. And so many of us are trained like, oh, we have to, have a guru's advice or whatever. And there is a time and a place for support and extra help for sure, but there's so much that we can do on our own if we can take responsibility for how we feel and have tools to navigate that stuff.
Cool.
So a big part of my teachings, whether in groups or privates, is really to empower people and remember how much they can offer themselves.
Man, when you say taking responsibility for your feelings, I think this is so central. This is so central to learning to see the world as a kind place.
Mm.
Especially now. And I feel like we've been saying this every year for decades, but especially now, we have like this very contentious world that we perceive around us of there's so much, I don't know, frustration and conflict and stress and anxiety and fear. And
Mhm.
you know what? Um, I recognize that that's what a lot of people are experiencing right now.
Yeah.
And but I got to tell you, my life is not full of conflict. Like my life is not full of fear. My life is not. I don't walk around worrying about my impending death. I don't walk around worrying about the horrors of tomorrow. Now, I did, like that was my
Mhm.
reality for a long time.
Yeah.
But through this path of kind of, as you said, going inside, questioning what's real, questioning what's true,
Mhm.
and taking responsibility for my feelings. So
Yeah.
if someone steps on my toes and I get angry, taking responsibility for the fact that I chose to get angry,
Mhm.
right? How many times have I
Mhm.
stepped on toes? And maybe I could offer the same grace that I might hope to have from another person, and then all of a sudden it's not dramatic anymore. And so when we look at I know that's a roundabout way of getting there, but as we eventually talk about kind of the gift of toxic relationships, which is something you focused on a lot with
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
practice, and finding the gift in that difficulty, why don't we talk a little bit about how taking responsibility for your own feelings can relate to processing really painful relationships?
Yeah, there's something that is kind of the easier, more simplified version of being able to dive into that because it is such a complex experience. And when you are especially intimately involved with someone, your energies are so entangled that sometimes you don't even know what's your stuff, what's someone else's stuff. It can be a really confusing time, especially if someone's draining your energy, whether intentionally or not. So you can really feel outside of yourself or beside yourself. What I see energetically is people will, especially within trauma or micro traumas of an abusive relationship daily, on a daily basis, they tend to lift out of their bodies because it's more comfortable there. Because when
Mm,
we're fully embodied and we experience the full brunt of the physical or visceral experience, it can be really intense. So I see a lot of people that are lifting out. And so we want to start to come back into the body with pleasure and enjoyment and appreciation and gratitude and all those better feeling things to be able to come back in. But until we release the congestion of the trauma and the toxicity and the stagnations, it's hard to want to come back in because all those things are still there. So when you're in the middle of it, it's really hard sometimes to see. So like you said before, give yourself some grace within that place because it is a really intense situation. But this kind of coming back around to where I started, the simplest form of this is if you recognize you're in suffering and
mhm.
that you have a choice not to be,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden things can start to open up in a way that you hadn't thought about before.
Yeah.
Because when you can focus on one thing, that feels manageable. You're like, oh, okay, I can do that. And you
Mm,
start to build that empowerment within you. But if you're focusing on all these things that aren't working, you're just like, oh, I'm overwhelmed. I just can't even, you know? So recognize, hey, I'm in suffering. I don't like this. This doesn't feel good. And I don't have to be here.
mhm.
Even just that alone can start to open up potential to moving out of that, to be able to gain clarity, to give you some relief or reprieve from that experience. And when you start to gain distance, then you can begin to understand what is actually your stuff and what isn't. Because when you finally can gain some distance, then you can actually learn to take responsibility for your own things because it's a little bit more clear what you're actually focusing on, you
Mhm.
know but as far as emotions are involved, those are our greatest gifts, is our emotions, especially the really loud ones, because with complete clarity something's off balance. You
Yeah.
feel it. So pay attention to those emotions when they come up because they're trying to say something to you. They're trying to tell you something. And when you learn to translate what that is, then you can better move in a direction that's better suited or more aligned with, where you'd like to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, just pay attention to that and let your emotions lead you. If something doesn't
Mhm.
feel good, stop engaging with it to the capacity that you can.
So you talked about just now, you mentioned that suffering is optional. And okay, so all the listeners, you can roll your eyes now because I'm going to talk about her again, right? Almost every episode I mention Byron Katie because she is just so extraordinary. And she talks a lot about the optional nature of suffering.
Mhm.
And so I would love for you to explain a bit, what do you mean when you say suffering is optional? And how do you begin to take steps down the path of choosing no longer to suffer?
It's a really interesting paradox because I'll take, for instance, a friend of mine. She had a really interesting and tumultuous upbringing, and she had a lot of responsibility for her 6 siblings growing up. Basically took care of everyone. So she developed this belief system that says, I have to take care of everyone or no one's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So throughout her life, she's kind of continued to live within that belief system. And so now she directs in relationships of very needy men and things like this, and a lot of toxic relationships. And so we have conversations and we say, I'll point out different things to her, like, oh, this is what's happening. Maybe this is tied to this belief system. Just try to open her mind or awareness. And her response is, well, that won't work because, or it's hard because. And so to me, that is showing up as complete resistance to healing. And
Yeah.
that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. She's just in a place right now where she's wanting to grip onto the old,
Yeah.
because we are addicted a lot of times to suffering if it's like been a consistent in our lives. And we don't know sometimes how to move away from that when something is so familiar. You
Yeah.
know what to expect there. It feels safe there, even though it's really uncomfortable, it feels safe.
Mhm.
So to start to recognize, are you addicted to your suffering? Are
Yeah.
you holding on to something that feels familiar and safe, even though you're really not happy there? And you start to challenge those things within yourself, and then you can start to get into those answers a little bit deeper,
Yeah.
and into your real truth. But it is totally optional, and there's 2 states of being, either a suffering state or a beautiful state. And when I first heard that, it was mind-blowing to me, because I thought, oh my gosh, I just felt the resonance of truth in it. And
Yeah.
so me being an energy worker, I was like, well, how does that work? How do I do that? And I'm very strategic with my mind too. So what I did when I saw energetically is, when we're in this state of suffering, we're kind of in this black vat of like tar,
Yeah.
right? You're
Yeah.
you're suffering, you're stuck in there. It's like you can't get out. You're just you're submersed in all this heaviness. It's not easy to make choice there, because you're literally surrounded by all this heaviness. So I thought, okay, so what would happen if I lifted myself out of that place? So visually, I'm a really visual person too. Visually, I lifted myself out of this vat. I brought myself over to this golden platform. I allowed source energy to just come flow and just clear whatever wanted to be cleared off of me. And then I decided, now from this place, I can choose something different for myself. But
Mhm.
we really do have to recognize we're in suffering in order to be able to pull ourselves out of it, to make choice. you
Yeah.
know so there's that those little steps along the way that can really be helpful in moving you out of it.
Yeah. And here's the controversial perspective on this, that pain is part of the beautiful life, right? You said that there's two lives. There's the beautiful life and there's the suffering life, and pain is beautiful. And so, the pain of maybe leaving behind a relationship and the natural sense of mourning that
Mhm.
goes along with that, the pain of having someone that you trust, hurt you, the
Mhm.
pain of having a life that you perceive as unfair, the pain of a toothache, right? It doesn't matter whether we're talking physical or emotional pain. Pain
Yeah.
is beautiful. And so I wonder, how do you perceive the difference between pain and suffering?
Mhm. That's an interesting question. I mean, to me, boy, that's interesting. Pain, I feel like, is almost more acute, maybe. Suffering feels more chronic. If something comes in, like if you stub your toe, that's pain. It's instant. Pop some arnica, help
Ah,
yourself
beautiful
through
pain. Ah.
it. But it's like there is something that gets your attention with pain too. But suffering, I feel like, is that more chronic state of being. And I think that sometimes pain you necessarily can't really gauge or plan for, because sometimes that is sort of an abrupt thing that happens, the unexpected. But it's really how you manage it is what is going to make the big difference. And sometimes people will really focus on the problem, and they think that by focusing on the problem that will be helpful, instead of focusing on the solution to the problem.
Mhm.
And so when you start to think about how can I help myself through this, how can I up level myself out of this, how can I change things for myself, you start to open to the potential of that, you can start to make the moves. But I do find, and I say this in my Limitless course too, that we can talk about later if it comes around, but even in the hippocampus in the brain, it's kind of our problem solving area. And people that complain a lot, it actually starts to shrink that area of the brain where it becomes less functional.
Yeah.
So people that really are complainers, they might have a harder time finding solutions, just because that part of their brain, that muscle hasn't really been worked.
Mm.
So even recognize where you are in that scale of, do I only focus on the problems and complain about things, or can I really pull myself out of that darkness and that state of suffering and find just something, the littlest glimmer of something that can help pull you out of that pain or suffering.
Through my own experience with waking up to spirituality, and through my work with my own clients, I guess I've come to a position that the reason I would call pain beautiful is that whether it's emotional pain or whether it's physical pain, and we won't even go into spiritual pain because that's a whole different story. But if we're talking about emotional pain or physical pain, both of them are loving, loving, generous, compassionate signs that something needs attention, right? So
Mhm.
if it's a toothache, it is my body saying, before things get too bad, go take a look at this, right?
Yeah.
Before the consequences are unreasonably difficult, like go take a look at this. And if someone doesn't compliment my new outfit on me and I feel pain about it, right? That is a beautiful, compassionate guidepost that says, "Hey, you're looking for your self-worth from another person.
Mhm.
And, let's look at that before it becomes too severe." Right?
Yeah.
Or if, my relationship with my mother makes me feel a certain way, it's like, "Hey, there's a fear-based need that's
Mhm.
impacting your relationship with your mother, and like, let's look at that before it causes damage. And so even if it doesn't feel good, it is a glorious act of compassion from our higher selves, uh, to allow us to react to a complicated world without creating more negative karma, without getting stuck in the gravitational pull of heaviness, and allowing us to continue our path toward ascension.
Mhm. So true. So
Yeah.
true. And I think that's the thing that I love your awareness and how you teach, that is when you can start to recognize the whispers of discomfort or pain and start to address things then before you get into crisis mode. Life can continue to function in a much more level playing field. A lot of people experience really drastic highs and really low lows, and that's when we're not really paying too much attention to what our body is saying to us, what our emotions are saying to us. And if we catch that early, we can calibrate and we can keep moving forward.
Yeah.
But if we ignore it, then that's where things really get loud
Yeah.
and demand attention.
So let me ask you this, because when you were talking a little bit earlier about, well, you made a comment that I already brought back attention to, which was, taking responsibility for your feelings. And so
Mhm.
as we kind of bring this back to our relationships with others, um, you know, when I say I'm responsible for how I feel, I don't imply any victim blaming. I don't,
Mhm.
because there is no blame. Oh my God, there's no blame. There's only
Yeah.
love. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's only love,
Yes.
even in the ugliness. There's only love. So, how do you kind of walk that line with the people you help between taking responsibility for your feelings and also not taking a disproportional amount of not beating yourself up or allowing yourself to be needlessly hurt by others?
There is something that happens within the old paradigm, excuse me, that we all have shadow parts of ourselves, right?
Mhm.
And to me, shadow parts I think of as just unhealed pieces, parts of self that we've tucked away in the dark so we don't have to deal with or see it so clearly. It's really just pieces of self that need nurturing. So the old paradigm was kind of in this place where, oh, you don't want to go in there. It's scary in there. We need to avoid that place,
Yeah.
you know? And that seems to be the program that kind of pipes through a lot of people. So when you talk about their inner worlds and they're looking at their insecurities and looking at how they honestly feel, they're like, whoa, whoa, I don't know about all that. That sounds a little crazy and that seems intense. It can be intense, but it can also be really exhilarating. So when we get into those pieces of self and learn that maybe your insecurity that you're feeling is just like you mentioned earlier, learning how to love myself, learning how to feel worthy of love. And so when you go into those places, it kind of auto corrects experiences outside of yourself. So again, a lot of people will try to focus on, let's say if someone's dating a narcissistic personality type and they're trying to focus on changing that person or changing themselves to suit that person's expectations, it's a big convoluted mess. But when you kind of clean things up, go in with a clear intention, I'm going to see what's happening within me. I'm going to see what needs to be healed, what's ready to be loved, and then see how if this person still fits, because you'll get a lot of clarity. This just doesn't even feel good anymore. This doesn't fit. This isn't working. There's more things that aren't working than are. And it becomes really clear then what decision you need to make.
Yeah.
But I think it's when people aren't understanding themselves that it makes life feel really confusing because they're so used to living in expectations, and we're all taught and trained, live for other people's expectations, ignore your needs, you're supposed to do what the people are doing, and we're really needing to unpack all of that, especially in the world today, because it's so important for each person, each individual to tune in to see, what do I need? What is best for me? And sometimes if it's releasing a partner, I kind of call this opposite day where I always tell people, if you're doing something for your highest good, it's automatically doing something for someone else's highest good.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And I had a woman say to me, well, if I choose to leave my abusive husband, that's not for his highest good because he's not going to have somebody to cook for him and clean for him and take care of his needs. And I said that you're looking at that from the 3D
That's
perspective.
right.
If you look at it from a soul perspective, you can see when you're moving away from abuse, that absolutely is for your highest good. And his soul is clearly in a stalling pattern right now of needing to be taken care of as a grown man. And so, quite possibly, it's his time to evolve a little bit, sense some empowerment, be able to take care of himself, his own needs, find some deeper level of self-respect and compassion, and grow as a soul. So
Yeah.
while you might not see that here in this dimension, from an outer dimensional perspective, that's truly the case. So it's kind of like broadening people's perspective so they can see the full picture. Because when we can see the full picture, we can make much better choices because we have the information that we need.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question. I feel like I went
I
on a
love it.
tangent.
Oh, I love it. No, I love it because, there are two things that are seemingly disparate, but both true. The first thing is that, um, let me see, how can I word this? Because I don't want to get a lot of angry emails, right? So, come at me, yo. So, okay, so so the first thing is that if you follow your inner wisdom,
Mhm.
consistently, you will not be in situations where you are taken advantage of. Because in reality, it's not possible to be taken advantage of without your participation, right?
Correct.
So if someone walks up to me on the street and sucker punches me, okay,
Mhm.
um, my intuition says, go away from that person.
Right.
If my ego says, don't back down, you're going to look like a coward. You need to assert your rights to be here. You
Mhm.
need to protect your manliness. You need to be tough. You need to
Mhm.
teach that person a lesson, right? And then I stay there and get punched again. The second punch is my fault because my source of love said, go, go, go. And
Mhm.
I bent my guidance to fit this tiny, twisted guidance of the 3D world, right? I
Mhm.
bent my love guidance to fit my ego and I maimed it. And I'm like, okay, no, I'm gonna stay here and I'm gonna show this person what's really happening. And
Yeah.
I get hurt. I get hurt when I could have walked away, right? In
Mhm.
reality, what do I lose by walking away? I lose nothing but a chance to get hurt again, right?
Mhm.
Like so, and I don't, I'm not here to oversimplify the nuances of, let's say, an abusive home relationship.
Mhm.
And this is what I meant with two things being true, but also disparate. While I believe that that point I just made is absolutely true under all circumstances,
Mhm.
I also believe that there may be people who are so entangled in the complexities of this world life
Mhm.
that um, maybe a little bit of extra help on perspective, options, physical security,
Mhm.
gentleness, maybe more help is needed because I recognize that it may not feel loving to yourself to pick up your kid and run in the middle of the night
Mhm.
when you could keep the roof over your head by staying at risk of being knocked around, right? I
Mhm.
recognize how complex of a choice that is. And I'm a white
Mhm.
man, I'm 6'4". Like I'm not the person who is at risk of that happening to me right now at this point in my life.
Mhm.
And so I just want to like, for my listeners, I don't mean to devalue how hard that is, but I do want to point to your own empowerment that you do have power, that there is a place of power, and that if you follow your inner love, it will direct you how to take care of yourself and no
Mhm.
longer need to be stepped on.
What's a really interesting thing is a lot of times fear will keep us stuck in situations that are not healthy or beneficial for us because again, we know how to navigate this trauma, this toxic relationship, this experience. And while it's not comfortable, we know what to expect. But it seems like to make the radical change that's needed to move away from that relationship is terrifying.
Yes.
And even to recognize that is a very normal response to that level of shift that's needed because it's terrifying. You don't know what to expect. And so, what I encourage people to do when they're needing to make big movements like that is to start to make smaller shifts for themselves so that they can learn that they're supported through those shifts.
Ah.
Because I mean, sometimes you are ready. Your soul is screaming at you. You're like, just leap. And you do. And all of a sudden you're caught by 1,000 friends and, all this abundance. You're like, oh my gosh, why didn't I do this before? 10 out of 10 times that's going to happen when we take those leaps. But, I always say, do what feels best to you in that moment of how large of a leap. Maybe it's a couple steps. Maybe it's jumping off completely. You have to kind of know how done you are But if you don't trust in leaping, do smaller things first so you can build that trust.
Yes.
So then when you do take that leap, you're going to know that you're being caught. And I remember when I was a teenager, I was in this long-term relationship with this very abusive man. And I finally was like, you know what? I'm peacing out. And I took everything that was mine from our place and I left him with basically nothing because I brought everything in. And I was okay with that because it just got to that point. And it was the strangest thing. And I didn't see this coming, but I literally felt like God's hands were carrying me for
Mm.
months after that. When I did something for myself, when I stood up for myself and said, I deserve better, literally, it was like these beautiful, huge, massive hands were carrying me through life. And
Yeah.
there were so many opportunities that came in, flooding in to my experience because I chose myself.
Yes.
So the more we do that, the more we learn that's what happens.
Mm.
When we honor ourselves, we are honored by forces much greater than the toxic relationship that we're currently,
Yes.
enduring or participating in. But
Yes.
it's again taking those leaps of faith when you can trust.
Now, I think you just touched on it. So, but for clarity, so what do you think is the gift of toxic relationships?
They are our greatest teachers for sure, because they will bring up every single shadow piece that's tucked or hidden or being challenged because they're so challenging of all of your inner layers. So, for instance, if you're in a relationship with somebody who's really easygoing and you just have fun together, you're like, this is nice, it's sweet, it's comfortable, and you don't do a lot of soul growth unless you're very intentional about it, which many of us are now. But, a lot of people just kind of ride it out. We're good, we're content, we're happy. It's like an old shoe, we're good. But if you're challenged with somebody who challenges you with your boundaries and who disrespects you and who dishonors you and who takes things from you, all of a sudden you are activated all kinds of places within to say, "Ooh, that's not working. That's not working. This isn't working." So all of those pieces that are being triggered within you are all showing up at once to heal. So it's intense to be in that type of situation. But if you can either stay and suffer in it, or you can say, "Whoa, holy cow, there's a lot of stuff going on in there. I got some cleanup to do. All right, what's showing up?" And you start to manage those things. And I would say the loudest thing first, take the priority of things first, because that's the thing that's ready to really be healed. So when you dive into that, you start to clean that up, all of a sudden you create this current of flow, and that stagnation or that cork, once you pop that, it's like, okay, now things can just start to come out and it's far less intense. The first time around is going to be the most intense. And it's not a scary intense. It's just like, holy cow, I didn't see that before.
Yeah.
And to me, it's fascinating. I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know that was in there. Like, whoa, what else is going on inside? you know? So curiosity is your best friend when you're enduring things like this. But it's, like I said, it just activates everything for you to be able to evolve in a really accelerated way. So
Yes.
I think it's the tremendous gift.
And here's a perspective. We look at, for example, in athletics, people want to compete at the highest level, right? Minor leagues are great, but what I really want to do is get to the major leagues. My regional championship is great, but I want to get to the state championship. Then I want to get to the national championship. Then I want to get to the world championship. Then I want to get to the Olympics, right? And it takes so much pain and so much effort to compete at these highest levels, but people do it because they see the gift of it.
Yeah.
They see the gift of it. So why is it that we can't see the gift of other hard things, right? Because when you are dating someone who is not at all triggering your sore points, your areas of growth, that's great. But that's like playing with your friends on the playground. Like that's not competing at the Olympics, right? And if you're not ready to go that hard, that's fine. All paths are perfect.
Yeah.
All paths are perfect. What you're doing is perfect, right?
Hmm.
But if you're ready, right? If you're ready to do the work so that uh, these pressure points fade away after the work, then there you go. That's the gift of having a family system that hurts you. That's the gift of having an intimate relationship that hurts you. It's the gift of having a boss that doesn't value you or makes you feel small at the end of every day. The gift is that, it's a chance for you to never feel small again. It's a chance
Right.
for you to never be taken advantage of again. Because once you step into your power, there is not a single person on the planet that could possibly hold you back. And that's why I think it's so important that you do this work, and that you help people to find the gift in these painful experiences, because it really is the door to freedom that you've been holding shut against yourself the whole time.
It is. And that's a good point that you brought around is when you do the work, you do really release that from your field and from your experience. Because from an energetic perspective, let's say you have this program or this wound that draws in abuse. And so when you stand up against that and you break through that stagnation of saying no more, that starts to clear out of your field. It decongests your field. And so when that's no longer in your frequency, you're not drawing those things in anymore. So it's
Mhm.
not something that you need to continue to manage. Like if you drop off, a toxic relationship and you have less of a chance of drawing another one in because you've worked through that old program and pattern. So the more depth you gain and access into that wound and really heal it, you can clear that thing completely and never have to manage drawing that in ever again.
That's
I
right.
mean, huge gift.
Yeah.
And the gift is evolution. And I always tell people the people that are coming in here with the intense experiences, you guys are rock stars
That's right.
because you came in here with that purpose to move through that stuff. If you're not moving through it, awesome. You've got one of those lifetimes where you're like just experiencing life and see what this planet's all about. But if you're having the hardcore experiences, you're meant to evolve in a big way here in this incarnation.
That's right. So talk to us as we kind of wrap up about how people can reach you, how they can experience what you have to offer, what's on the horizon for you, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, thank you. The best place to find me is my website, jeanatman.com. I've got different offerings on there and different ways to kind of access my different tips and tools and things that I put out. I also have a limitless course, which is my labor of love. I was recognizing that the one-on-ones they really so satisfying and they feed my soul. I love to have that intimate connection with people and really get into the depth, but guidance kept coming through saying reach more people, reach more people, reach more people. I was like, how do I do that? So I created a course that really was able to reach a lot more people, and it manages things like how to identify limiting beliefs, what to do with triggers, how to silence the inner critic, all these, are we self-sabotaging ourselves, how to really access all these places within that aren't working. So I
Yeah.
assist people in building a new foundation so they can really operate from a higher level perspective. And then we talk about things like love, abundance, the art of receiving, all of these things that are kind of problematic, that can be remedied after you fix that foundation. So that's my most recent labor of love. And I'm also working on my book. I'm not sure when that'll be published, but that's my current creative project that I'm getting into.
All right. So we should be definitely queuing into your website to stay on top of kind of what you're focusing on and what options you have available. So, all right, good to know.
Yeah.
JeanAtman.com. Jean, thank you so much for being on
Yeah.
Refractive today. I think it's been a really, I think it's been just a lovely conversation, and I just really appreciate what you've done.
Thank you. I appreciate having you here or having me here with you, I suppose I should say, and all the depth of conversation. I love it. So thank you.
Absolutely. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. And as always, as you go out and you walk down the sidewalk and you meet all these people who are going through their own stuff, and some people are friendly and some people are surly, just remember that, the gift that you can give is to be kind and aim your light. Have a good day. You have been listening to Refractive Podcast, and this is Johnny G. If you've enjoyed today's episode, do me a favor, give it a share on social media, or if you're in the podcast app, give it a rating. If you're on YouTube, click like. It really does make a difference in the search results. I am a speaker, coach, and facilitator based in Washington, D.C., but I work in person and remotely with people who are ready to step with clarity into their most authentic life. If I can be of service, reach out to me, Johnny, JOHNNY, at refractivecoaching.com. Have an amazing day.
be good to each other, and always remember, aim your light.